Let's rock and roll. Hello, and welcome to the Rock Metal Podcast. I'm your host, John Harris, and today on the Rock Metal Podcast, we have MERCURIOUS, who just released a banger of a single. They're about to release another banger of a single, and I'm being presumptuous because I actually don't know. I'm just assuming, Ralph, that it's a banger of a single, and then they're going to continue to release more bangers of singles, and my credibility is on the line here. I don't actually know, but I'm hoping that they don't suck and that my credibility is shot. But Ralph, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely great to have you on. I remember Mish reached out to me and said, check this band out, and I listened to it, and aside from the fact that it's a great song, the snare drum, I was like, man, I want to carry that snare drum with me everywhere I go.
Oh, that's great. I think our drummer is going to be absolutely ecstatic that you said that about the snare drum.
It's such an important part of the song.
100%. It really, really is. It can actually make or break a mix. And in that particular mix, I don't think our drummer was completely happy with how the snare drum came out. But, I always found that sometimes drummers are never completely satisfied with their drum tones, no matter what.
I know. It's like guitar players. If you were to ask them, hey, did you want to re-record the guitar? They go, yes, every time.
Oh, 100%. A good tone only lasts for about a minute. You you search for a great tone your whole life, and then you die never finding one.
That sounds almost depressing, but it's one of the best revelations I've ever heard. And you are a guitar player, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. I imagine guitar tone is kind of like watching a fireworks show. You see the fireworks go off, you're like, there it is, and then the fireworks are gone, and reality hits.
That's more or less it. I think that's actually what happens. You just get used to it, and you go, I'm bored, and then you start looking for something else.
Yeah. Now, I guess maybe take us through this track, because you're mixing some genres together. Did you guys run into any kind of problems with that, with particularly finding guitar tones? Because the whole thing seems seamless to me. Not
really. As far as guitar tones go, there's only really two that's being used there. It's or three, sort of. You've got just the main sort of heavy guitar tone, and then you've got sort of the intro clean tone, which has a few little sort of effects like flanger and phaser. And then you have sort of the clean tone that's just more of a regular sort of clean guitar. So with a clean guitar in particular in the verses, I was going for something that would sound somewhat kind of like a 80s clean tone kind of thing, something you might hear in 80s pop song, like something from a Michael Jackson or a Prince. Mm-hmm. But as far as a heavy tone goes, I just approached it the way I would approach any kind of metal or rock song. I just wanted something with the same characteristics I'd always want, something just sort of heavy, tight, but not super saturated, because I think there are parts in the song that you could say are, sound kind of, I suppose, classic heavy metal, this one part that's probably similar to a sort of Van Halen bit. So I wanted something that was heavy, but not too overdone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Out of which stage of Eddie's career are we talking about as far as Van Halen guitar tone? Are we talking For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, where he used the Soldano 100?
I would probably... The Soldano is a great amp for sure. So I used the Axe effects, but I used the EVH 3 model, so his most recent amp. Yeah. So I'd say probably one of his more recent tones, because his early tones are great, but definitely, just a lot of 1980s sort of 70s tones, they weren't super distorted.
Right.
But that's the amp model that I use, the EVH 3.
Okay. Very cool. So definitely more modern stuff. Very cool.
I listened to that snare drum, by the way. Huge.
Yeah, he just went on his iPad and listened to the song, and he's like, that snare drum is huge.
Yeah, I want that for a sample, basically, is what I'm saying.
Whoa.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so good. We'll try to deliver that to you.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to give up your snare samples, but I know a lot of people covet that. They're like, no.
Well, our engineer will be very happy with that, at least. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah. Sweet. Now, 80s clean guitar tone, that's a stellar one, because that could be a few different things. I read at one point that it's actually a DI straight into the board and compressed like hell, and then adding a chorus effect to it. Did you do something like that?
I used the Axe effects once again. I can't quite remember the model. I think it was a Fender amp model of some kind. And then through the Axe effects, there is definitely a compressor there with a chorus and a few other sort of smaller effects. More or less. But there is an amp model there somewhere to help sort of like give it that tone.
Okay. Sounds like the Axe effects is being used quite a bit.
It's the thing that I use for all the guitar tones. It's an amazing thing. It makes it so easy to record. Makes it so easy to re-record if you go back, and especially when I'm editing the guitars, getting it ready for it to be mixed. You know, sometimes I'll hear something and go, oh, you know, I really did not play that well. You know, just to go back, everything is saved. Just slap on some new strings and go for it again. So it's a brilliant sort of little machine. Absolutely love it.
Mm-hmm. Do you use that live as well, or is it just for studio stuff?
Live as well. I bought it predominantly to play it live, but it just works so well for the studio as well. It's my everything rig now, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Funny story. I was reading an article about an artist who was recording, and they went to the studio, recorded every single amp that they had, and it was a large studio, like one of the remaining ones left that's large, and they had a large collection of amps. They recorded everything, EVH, rectifier, everything. Came back, said none of it works, it's too big. So they ended up finding a tone that they made on their Axe effects and used that on the album, and I thought that was interesting. Sometimes this stuff sounds better than the real thing, Raouf.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that, because getting the right mic position, getting the right sort of signal, and I suppose EQ with a real amp is challenging. Like, in the hands of an expert engineer, I'm sure you can engineer something that's definitely better than an Axe 8 or Axe effects. But put in the hands of most people, then yeah, I think the Axe effects is just the most reliable way to get a great tone.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming up to this single, Revelation, what is this song about? Because I know we chatted about that you wanted to bring in a lot of different influences, and the name Michael Jackson came up, which is that's great. I'm trying to think of some way to phrase it. I don't really think that he was like, a lot of times you listen to that old stuff and you're like, man, there's a rock song hiding in there, and I don't know that I necessarily got that vibe out of Michael, but I definitely listened to a lot of his older stuff because the mixes are great, the production is fantastic. I mean, you got Quincy Jones, so it's...
You got Tom Jones.
Tom Jones is a different guy. But yeah, you got Quincy Jones. I mean, absolutely incredible stuff, especially Off the Wall. I love listening to the Off the Wall album, which, you know, some of that percussion. I mean, number one, they had to actually record that percussion and perform that percussion. But incredible stuff. So I guess lyrically, what is this song about?
Yeah, so Risa vocalist wrote the lyrics, so I'll do my best to sort of interpret them, and they are kind of down to individual interpretation. So I suppose it's sort of about, I sort of have this elevator pitch for it, but I sort of can't quite recall it now. But I guess it's a little bit about sort of the social injustice and the sort of growing inequalities that we see in the world, that sort of, you know, driven through, I suppose, you know, the upper tiers of wealth holders, you know, the 1%, as you say, and the, I suppose, impacts they're having on the economy, the financial market, and the earth, you know, as far as the climate goes, and the fact that we are so willing to sell all these sort of essential things, essential parts of our society and our own internal, like, physical and mental health for the sake of $1. So it is very kind of driven by that theme. And it's interesting because when so Nick, the keyboardist, and I wrote this song, the music, I always envisioned there to be quite more positive lyrics. Something kind of like bouncy, a little bit more fun. But Reese came in with these lyrics that just really turned this almost into an anthem in a way. There are some parts in there that are really driven percussively that just really work with Reese's vocals. And Reese has this like slight snarl and growl to his voice in certain parts. I think it really brings out that emotion.
Yeah. You know, the funny thing is, I'm sure a lot of people in the world can relate to that, everything you just said there, but we just actually finished chatting with another band in Australia that was writing about the exact same thing. I'm just curious, is it something that is a strong sentiment right now in Australia?
I think so, for sure. It has been for the last few years. We've seen, you know, as you may or may not know, I'm not sure, but we have a lot of, you know, amazing natural landscapes and a lot of just beautiful nature down in Australia. We have, for example, the Great Barrier Reef, which is known all around the world, that is slowly dying, and our governments have not been able to intervene in the way that we had all hoped. I think there is, you know, depending on the age group, I think you would ask, there is a growing dissatisfaction with the federal government in how they've handled climate change policies. We've seen Joe Biden, I think he's just announced his goal to cut emissions in half by 2030. By comparison, I can't quite recall the target that we've set for ourselves, but by global comparison, it's quite low. It's a very poor target. And, you know, our Prime Minister has been scolded by other world leaders, particularly UK's Boris Johnson, about his stance on climate change. So I think because of that, it has drawn a lot more criticism from Australians. Mm-hmm. And I think there's just that, we just haven't seen that leadership here in Australia like there are in other democracies in the world on that issue.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting bagged on by Boris Johnson...
Yeah, you have an issue, right?
You got a real problem. Yeah.
I guess so.
Well, that's nice of Mr. Biden. We'll see if Americans vote him out and then they change it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't mean to sound too terribly cynical, but I've dealt with them and their shit long enough.
Yeah, I think me too. I think me too.
I'm just at that point in the pandemic where I'm like, screw America, man. Like, just flush.
I wish I was there right now.
Why would you wish to be in America right now?
Oh, America.
Oh,
I thought you said Australia.
No, Australia would be cool. We'd be able to do things.
Yeah, if you were a band right now, we would be able to tour.
I'm so sorry to tell you.
Yeah.
We've had a very normal life.
Yeah. Groovy. Okay, so now, so far we chatted about snare drums, 80s clean guitar tone. We chatted about EVH 5153. And
when did you guys start chatting about Cobra Kai?
When did we start? We haven't chatted about Cobra Kai at all. Raouf, do you want to chat about Cobra Kai?
I don't really know what that is. Is that a TV show?
It is a TV show.
I've not seen it.
Okay.
Is it good?
It is, yeah, alarmingly good. It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a gritty drama.
Is this the Karate Kid thing?
Yes, it is.
I've heard of it. Yes, my friend recommended it to me the other day.
Yeah. If you feel like getting sucked into an overly dramatic show for absolutely no reason, I think that it's great.
Yeah.
Okay, I just finished watching O.J. Simpson versus the People, and that was very overly dramatic.
Yeah. Were you old enough to live through those times, Raouf?
No, I would have been. I'm 29 now, so I would have been maybe 4 or 5. I remember when Princess Diana died, but I wasn't old enough to live through that.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe a little less. No, I guess it depends on who you are. I mean, slamming into a bridge in a car and kind of like incinerating on impact is definitely dramatic. So I remember that. Princess Di. Yeah. No, I remember watching the chase on TV with OJ,
yeah, right.
with OJ and all that. And the trial. If the glove does not fit, you must acquit.
Yeah.
All right. Now, we chatted about Revelation quite a bit and what's going on there. Next one is, you mentioned that you guys have a single coming up called The Fade. Now, I haven't heard it yet, so I'm going to trust that it's good. What can you tell us about this track?
We really love it. We think it's different to Revelation. So Revelation, while you have some of those funky elements, you've got a very loud brass section. We don't really have that with the Fade. The Fade is a lot more inspired by. If I had to pick one band, I'd say Muse. There's definitely bits heavier than Muse in there for sure, but I'd say it's that kind of musy, carnival-y kind of sound. A lot more prog metal. Like, I think Revelation kind of definitely has a lot of unique flavors. I'd say this one just sounds more like sort of like a prog metal track. Synths involved, yeah, I think still has that playful kind of like funky drive to it, but not in the same way as Revelation. So I think people will really enjoy it. It's very groovy. I absolutely love the chorus. Reese did just an incredible job with it. Hopefully people love it as much as we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. Mish should...
And I think in a lot of ways the snare sounds better. So let's see what happens.
Whoa.
Let's see what you guys think. I'd love to hear your opinions on the snare.
Whoa. He says the snare sounds better in the Fade.
It sounds different. I think it's going to be 100% a subjective thing.
Now, could that be a tempo thing? The snare can blossom more because it's a slower tempo?
That's potentially true, yeah. It is a little bit slower, so it's a little bit... there's a lot more space in there. I think Revelation, the nature of the track, it needed that kind of bombastic sort of snare, where this one is just a little bit more pulled back.
Okay. I guess my next question is, because since I'm hearing Revelation, I'm kind of expecting the singles to follow, to kind of sound like that or follow that vein. Is there an intention in making it sound cohesive, or is there absolutely no intention in cohesive? Just here's a single and dance away.
Cohesive to an extent. So we could, with all the songs that we have that we're going to be releasing, I'd say each of them have enough similarities where you can hear a Mercurious sound. I would say that. So there was one point where we were looking at this and we were thinking maybe we break this down as an EP or into individual EPs or collections, and we call it seasons or something. And this would be like the summer tracks, which would be like a Revelation. And then this one would be like maybe an autumn track or a winter track, which are a little bit darker, a little bit more melancholic, which the Fade is. And there is definitely a few narratives we've come up with to tie it together. But if you were just listening to them, I think they do sound more like there's no real obvious like concept or anything to tie them all together. Mm-hmm. I think that's just because of the nature. When we first started writing these songs, Nick and I had just finished up our previous band and we just wanted to write songs of any description. And these all came out roughly in the vein of prog metal and rock. But we've just gone for it. And, sometimes we're like, sometimes we feel like there's no specific sound that we've gone for, but I think there's enough of a flavor where we could get away with it. You look at bands like Muse, Queen, and definitely not comparing us to those bands, but those bands have managed to create a whole catalog of songs that they have experimented and they've gone with lots of different sounds and they've managed to make it work. So we're hoping that the songs are good enough on their own that people just enjoy them for what they are, rather than, I know that a lot of albums these days are very conceptual, but we haven't really gone in that direction with these songs. Maybe in the future, maybe there is an album, maybe after this we'll start to think about maybe a concept album or something. We're not sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I noticed in Revelation you were mentioning Michael Jackson. In the Fade you're mentioning Muse. Do you kind of focus on a particular influence for a track when you're working on it, or is that just a coincidence?
It's more, it's definitely a coincidence. So definitely don't go into a track being like, let's make this one more like Muse. We might I think once we start writing, we kind of go, okay, what's this starting to sound like? And obviously through our influences, that's going to show through our music. So in this case, we start writing it, and obviously subconsciously, we're probably drawing on Muse and all these other bands. And maybe as we start to polish it, we're like, okay, well, if this is starting to sound like this sort of artist, what are some of the things, maybe some of the ideas or influences we could borrow from that to make it more like this? Like, for example, with Revelation, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, we tried to look at some of the ways that they use brass to emphasize certain some of the rhythms, and that kind of, you know, influenced us with the like that you hear throughout Revelation. So in small ways like that, we kind of draw on our influences, but it's not like we have this photo of Michael Jackson on the wall or Muse and we go, okay, let's write like them, you know?
Yeah, in the middle of a session getting angry, guys, and you start pointing at the wall, would Michael approve of this?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
That bass line doesn't sound like Muse would write it, and you start getting mad.
Yeah.
Cool. Then, I kind of, you mentioned there was, you know, some of the stuff that Michael Jackson did. Do you then follow, like, the producer? Like, do you take a look at maybe of other of Quincy Jones's stuff?
Not specifically Quincy, but, you know, we have looked at, like, for example, I don't know if he was involved, but Rick James, like, some of his music is very, like, funky. And, you know, looking at even modern day, like, great producers like Childish Gambino, for example, I mean, you probably couldn't hear any Childish Gambino influence there, but we do look at a lot of great, like, contemporary producers and see what they're doing, see if there's any kind of interesting sounds we could use. And of course, like a plethora of rock and metal. I know I've talked about a whole lot of pop songs, but I'm still very much a metalhead, you know, like I love bands like Opeth. The reason I started playing guitar and learning guitar is bands like Megadeth, for example. So one of my favorite guitarists is Marty Friedman, which is a big influence on my, like my solo playing, my lead playing. So I do draw a lot of influence from a lot of, rock and metal bands. I've been particularly loving bands like Leprous lately, prog metal band from Norway, which are just phenomenal, really great songwriters.
Yep.
And been looking at mostly at how people, rather than, I think when I was younger, I'd try to listen out for riffs and technical songwriting and how fast they can play. But these days I just look for bands that just write good songs and try to understand what makes their song sound so great, and, you know, in my own way try to replicate that.
Groovy baby. All right, so we chatted about snare drums on Revelation and the Fade. We chatted about
Michael Jackson, Don't Stop Enough.
Michael Jackson. We chatted about Quincy a little bit, mostly Michael Jackson though. We chatted about the old EVH.
We chatted about slower tempos for more snare samples for Descent to Me.
Yeah, we chatted about does the tempo make a difference on the snare's ability to blossom? And
Probably does.
Of course it does. We chatted about the two singles, one that's out now, one that will be coming out, and by the time this interview airs, it probably will be out, The Fade. And then the plan is to continue to come out with more singles, and we kind of chatted a little bit about the direction of those singles. Is it cohesive to Revelation and The Fade? We just finished chatting about that. Is there anything that I missed, Raouf?
No, that sounds great.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the Rock Metal Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great chat.
Okay, go ahead and hit stop, please, sweetie.